One of the questions I've been thinking about this semester is how artists can communicate to their viewers how to interact with their art. And it occurs to me that designing interactive art is kind of like getting a stranger to play with you who you've never met, and how can you communicate exactly what you want them to do. And I've also been thinking about the different ways that we interact with art, and specifically how we can make viewers interact more deeply and more meaningfully with the art that we create. So I'll talk more about that in a second. Before we get too far into my presentation, I want to just define some terms that I'll be using a lot. When I talk about interactive art, I mean art that does something in response to what the viewer does. So think of it like a conversation. The object's response has to be based on what the viewer did, and it can't always respond the same way to every stimulus. Another term I'll be using a lot is interface design, and this refers to the way that artists arrange visual and auditory cues to convey information and facilitate the user's experience. And then finally, I'm going to talk more about this in a moment. It's a longer topic, but I just want to introduce right now the concept that some interactions are more deep and more meaningful than other interactions, that there's levels of embodiment and levels of interactions. So interface design is really important because we live in a digital world, and a lot of the information we get is through interfaces. If it's online, through your smartphone, Facebook, social media, we get a lot of information that way, and so it's really important that the information can be communicated quickly and efficiently. We also live in a globalized world, so it's important that these interfaces can be legible and approachable to people from many different cultures. So a better understanding of interface theory helps digital artists, obviously, but it also informs the way we design the electronic devices we use every day. And eventually, the better interface design will lead to more improved communication and faster communication. And I also believe that the deeper the level of interaction, the more meaningful your interaction with the object is, the better these goals are achieved. So my research question is, how can we as artists use the one thing that we have control over, which is the interface, to foster deeper levels of embodiment with our objects? So now I'm going to get into that discussion about what the different levels of embodiment mean and how we can think about them separately from each other. And to help me with this, I'm going to show you this interactive art piece called Yamascope by Sidney Fells. Sidney Fells is an interactive digital artist, but he also coined the different levels of interaction that we use when we talk about interaction. So I'm going to show this, and here's a little bit of music. For a second.
Should we make it full screen, Lisa?
Just so I can talk, I'm going to mute it for now. So Fellows says that there's 4 different levels of interaction, and they progress from the shallowest, least meaningful interaction to the most meaningful interaction. The first level is that the person communicates with the object, and you can think about this like cause and effect. So the person does something, and then the object does something in response, and that response is meaningful to the viewer. So in this example, the woman might wave her hand and then see that the screen has changed, and then that new appearance means something to her. The second level is the person embodies the object. And this is like the satisfaction of mastery. So in this example, it would be the woman figuring out all the different ways she can manipulate the image and figuring out exactly how to make this specific shape or this specific sound. And that deep level of understanding is what's satisfying in that level. The third level is the object communicates with the person. And in this level, the object isn't doing anything, but the person gets some meaning from it. You can think about like when you look at a static painting, the painting's not doing anything, but you still get meaning from it. So in this case, that would be like the woman looking at the visual of this piece just as a visual and getting some meaning from the way it looks to her, separate from how she interacts with it. And finally, fourth, the object embodies the person. And this one is kind of hard to see, but it's really a transcendent experience where the person feels totally connected to the object, and it's just like an extension of themselves. It's totally easy to use. It's a state of flow. So it's not important that you understand all the different minutiae between these different levels, but I just want to drive home the point that there's different levels of interaction, and the deeper, more meaningful they are, it just means that you have a stronger connection with the object. So play is actually very well suited to facilitate embodiment because play spaces are safe spaces where people can experiment without lasting repercussions. They're separate from the real world, which allows people to develop mastery and attain that sense of flow that we were talking about a minute ago. So consciously creating a play space within interactive art installations might be a way to help artists create deeper embodiment with their viewers. So how can we indicate to our audience that our art installation is a play space? Humans have one advantage, which is language. We can just say, oh, this is a play space, it's time to play. But language isn't universal, going back to what I talked about at the beginning, and instructions are famously ignored in art installations. So it would be more effective to tap into some instinctual, natural, instinctive response that something indicates play. So that would be accessible for everybody if we can find such a thing. So to get some idea of what this might be, I looked at research on animal play, and I found that animals, when they play, use very realistic symbols, and sometimes these symbols can be threatening, but they preface it with a play symbol, which is usually like a bow. And so after they do this play symbol, they're free to use whatever other symbols they want, and the threatening symbols are always superseded by the play symbol. And once they're playing, stronger animals may tend to do things that would never happen in real life, like pretend to be subdued by a weaker animal. So we can determine that the play gesture represents leaving the real world for a play space. And that separation is so powerful that it allows animals to subvert their highly rigid hierarchical structures, because it's clear that this is a separate space, there's no risk, it's not real life. I also looked at some interactive art pieces that I think are particularly effective. I looked at Yamascope, which is the piece we saw earlier. And in this piece, I think tells us two really important things simultaneously. One is he's pulling the viewer in with familiar imagery, but he's simultaneously delineating the art object as separate with the selective distortion that we saw. So the familiar part, is the fact that the imagery is made up of projections of your own body. It's film of you doing things. So you can see that it's something that's safe, something that you can engage in, and you can gain mastery over. At the same time, he's also distorting the piece, right? So this allows the person to disassociate themselves from the piece and recognize it as something else that has the power to create meaning and experiences. So this separation allows the person to communicate and embody it allows the object to communicate and embody the viewer, because it's something that's different from you, but it's still creating meaning because you're so engaged with it. Also, this piece is welcoming. You want to engage with it because it makes these cool shapes and sounds, and it gives this positive reinforcement right away. So you can tell this is something that you can safely engage with. And finally, I looked at software design because software uses interfaces, obviously. And Chris Crawford comes up with 3 main points about software design. One is that the user should feel safe. So that means that they shouldn't be able to make mistakes, or if they can't, that they should be able to undo them. The key here is to let the user feel like they can explore, because it's through exploring that we gain mastery and this deep relationship with the object. Secondly, the software has to present information effectively, and the best way to do that is with standardized elements. So things like you see everywhere, pop-ups, drop-down menus, cursors, and highlighting objects. These are all standard elements that you could use in software. And when there are multiple options, you should prioritize them by frequency of use. So like if you think about a word processing document, 90% of the actions you take are in the file drop-down menu. That's because those are the most frequently used objects, so it doesn't make sense to make you search all over for things that you only want to do those 10 or whatever functions. And finally, don't talk too much, which means listen to the user more than you talk to them through the software. The user doesn't want to read a manual, they just want to know how to do it, so make your software intuitive, and don't interrupt their experience. So don't give dialogue pop-ups more than you have to, because that just interrupts the flow and makes them realize that this is a separate object that they're not connected to. So in conclusion, both humans and animals require safe spaces outside the everyday world where they can feel free to experiment in order to play. And when we really play, we create a strong embodiment with the object, leading to more meaningful interactions. Some areas for future research would be cross-cultural play indication and human-specific place listening. Thank you.